Good morning and welcome to Emsi webinars. Thank you for joining us today. It's great to have you along. Hopefully you will benefit from this really informative webinar. We have with us today Will Cookson, who is the Director of Economic Development, and Duncan Brown, who's our Senior Economist. And obviously, as you know, we're going to be talking about the gaming industry and how it's developing economically at the moment. If you have any questions, please put them in the question box and we'll get to them at the end of the webinar. So without any further ado, good morning, Will.
Good morning, Debbie. Good morning, Duncan, and good morning to everyone that has joined us. Apologies for the slight delay with us getting started. We had a few technical issues. They should all be resolved now and we shouldn't have any further issues, touch wood. Yes, today we're going to be looking at the gaming industry and we're going to be sharing some insight that we've got on that particular sector. Here's the contents for today's webinar. We're going to go through introductions. We're going to have a look at the context in regards to the gaming industry, dig in and understand and share what we understand about the growth within that industry and that sector, look at skills demand, how it's distributed across the UK as in terms of its presence. We'll look at recruitment demand, looking at job postings and what can be drawn from that. And then we'll share what's next. So just to quickly and briefly introduce Emsi, for those of you who don't know us already, our mission is to help people to draw upon labour market data to help inform them and connect people, education and employers. And we do that through sharing three primary sources of data. In the middle here, we've got labour market information. We had more than 2 billion data points from dozens of government data sources, and we were able to project that forward currently to 2028. On the left-hand side, we've got job postings, which is a big data source where we've got more than 40 million unique job adverts that we can draw from to add context to the labour market information. And on the right-hand side, we've got online profile analytics, which is our latest data set that's been added in, where we have more than 11 million online professional profiles in the UK from 130 plus sites where people have shared their CVs or their jobs in history and qualifications. So that's a very brief introduction to Emsi. What I'd like to do now is to introduce Duncan Brown, who's our Senior Economist. So Duncan, today we're looking at the gaming industry. Why that particular sector? Why is that of interest to us?
Well, I mean, the sort of the proper reason is that it's kind of expanding greatly over recent years. I mean, many of you, like me, will be fascinated by the fact that sort of teenage game players can now make a living by playing games, whereas it always seemed an expensive hobby when you were younger. And it's growing prodigiously. It's an area where the UK seems to do well. Because there's a lot of history here in terms of games development, and also things like the English language and things like that also help as well. So yeah, there's a lot going on, and it's also interesting as a regional story as well, because as we'll see, it's not just one of these industries that tends to be confined to one part of the country. It tends to spread out. So there's lots of reasons. On the other hand, it's good to be releasing a research report when many of us are stuck at home and have more time to read, as we do at the moment. When we started down this road of research in the game industry, we weren't exactly anticipating that the country would be in the grip of the coronavirus by now, but we've got the report there, and as I say, lots of people going to be at home with their time to read. So in that sense, it's still a good time to be pushing it out there.
It's probably worth noting that our webinar attendance figures are greatly increasing, and long may that last. That's great.
I thought that was because I was here, Will, but there you go.
It might be. I'm not. It could be a combination. Yeah, a winning combination. So what are we looking at?
Yeah, so gaming is now a big business. I mean, you think of it as being a very small industry, but the size of it is getting pretty big now because it's grown so much. So the British film industry released a report a few years ago, back in 2016, which was actually about a range of industries, but gaming was in there, and it estimated that across gaming development, publishing, and also retail, which we don't focus on here, it accounts for 48,000 jobs and nearly £3 billion of GVA that year. So it's quite a lot, for an industry that we historically consider very niche. The ONS there say that there's about 1,600 companies out there, but there's some good work a couple of years ago by Nesta and UKIE, or UK Interactive Entertainment, the game industry trade body, which they've updated regularly, and there's a thing called the Games Map, which UKIE push out, which suggests that the actual number is more like 2,261 companies. And that's because when companies register with Companies House and they nominate their SIP codes, a lot of companies in and around the gaming economy aren't actually classifying themselves in the SIP codes that the ONS has set out for them to do so, because they see their roles in different ways. So, you might see yourself doing different kinds of functions than producing games, but actually it is games that you're developing. So for this study, we just focus, as I said, on the development and the publishing side, not the retail side. And we're using sort of the traditional labour market intelligence, which uses those SIP categories, it has to be said, as well as big data from our job postings and profiles.
So if SIC doesn't, standard industry classifications don't tell the full story, we're still using them within this research project. Yeah. Why is that?
Well, the reason is because as imperfect as it is for a case like this, SIC is still the way that we organise lots of that traditional labour market information, which still gives us reliable and robust answers on certain quantities like job numbers that we can't get from anywhere else. And so, you can think of this as a potentially conservative estimate, although my guess is that the problem of SIC relevance is kind of not getting worse over time. It's probably fairly stable. And so in terms of looking at the trends, it's still giving us the right direction, even if it's not telling us the whole story. But that's where job postings and profiles can tell us a lot more about what's going on, because there we're not relying on the traditional categories. We actually use the postings and profiles of job ads and CVs that actually tell us about where they've got skills around gaming development. And that uses, that's a lot more reliable than relying on those traditional categories in this case. So using the mix of both, the traditional LMI is still the most reliable for the quantification, and that's why we use it here. At worst, it's conservative, so it's telling us that it's underplaying the story, but probably the trend is kind of reliable, even if the volume might be underestimated a bit. So that's why it's still valuable as part of the mix. So if we carry on, we can actually have a look at how much the industry's grown. And as it says there, the game industry is booming. And so between 2008 and 2018, even with a really big recession because of the financial crisis at the start of that period, the industry's tripled its job numbers from over 5,000 to over 15,000 in 2018. And our estimate is that that's added another 1,000 in 2019 and continuing to grow into the future on our projections. And so, to just put that in context, that's more than 200% growth over that time, compared to 8% for the wider jobs market and 18% for the information and communication sector, the digital sector more generally. So it gives you a sense that even though the digital sector has grown quite well over that period, gaming has massively outpaced it, really, growing 10 times as fast. So if we go on to the next one, we can see what kind of jobs that's generating. And so, as you might imagine, there are other industries out there that are generating lots of jobs too, but very few of them generating them of the sort of the skill level and quality that you get in the gaming industry. And unsurprisingly, the biggest in numbers terms is programmers, adding 3,000 programming jobs from 2008 to 2018. But there's lots of other jobs around that, including a lot in creative roles. So you can see that graphic designers, for example, have been one of the fastest growing. Even if the numbers aren't huge compared to programmers, they're still a relatively important part of it. And you also see things in there like authors, writers and translators haven't grown a lot, but they are still part of the industry. And then there's lots of marketing and sales roles around that as well. So it's quite an interesting combination of technical, creative and commercial. So if we go to the next slide, you can actually see where that growth is across the country. So on the right-hand side, we've got the location quotient. So regular Emsi visitors will know that we often use a location quotient. It's a metric from economic geography that compares the share of jobs locally to the share of jobs nationally and gives you an index. So if you've got a location quotient of 1, that means that you've got an average share of jobs in that industry, and as you go above 1, it suggests that you've got a relative concentration. And as you can see from that map there, there's a set of concentrations up and down the country, and so you've got really strong ones around Surrey and Sussex with Guildford and Horsham, and then another one in South Cambridgeshire as well. It's quite small, but there's another one that's really strong in London. But then you've got lots of others that are still really quite impressive in the West Midlands, around Leamington, in Cheshire, growing ones in Liverpool and Leeds, and one in Strabane as well. On the left-hand side, we've got the growth in jobs in those areas as well, and so you can see that actually it's not always this sort of the strongest existing clusters that have grown the fastest. So you can see that Cheshire, for example, has added more jobs than anywhere else, around 500 jobs in that period. So quite interesting the way that it is scattered up and down the country. Dundee's another heavy concentration that's worth noting as well.
Now, it does look really localized, Duncan. I mean, obviously there's a full report that's going to be coming out, and we'll talk about that later in the webinar, but will that highlight the actual geographic hotspots in more detail?
Yeah, it will. It will show how that's changing over time. I mean, the stories are quite interesting because some of them have, grown almost from nothing through that period. There were areas that had basically no gaming jobs in 2010 that have now got quite significant concentrations of them because, it being such a fast-growing industry, actually it's possible for areas to go from, from basically nothing to actually being significant concentrations. And so you'll see that, and you'll also see how some of the areas that are longest established, while they're still growing, are actually losing their sort of position as kind of, if you go back 10 years ago, there are a few places like Guildford and South Cambridgeshire that were almost, dominating the gaming industry in this country, whereas now it's much more spread out. But one of the interesting things, of course, is how spread up and down the country it is. It's, the gaming industry is big in London, but it's not just London, for example.
Oh, that is interesting to see.
Yeah, so if you go on to the next one. So what we've done here is, while in the report we go into a lot more detail about the very local areas, here we've just done it on some government office regions to just compare the sort of the broad categories there. So we focused on London, North West, South East and West Midlands as the 4 regions that have the sort of the strongest presence in it. And London has the largest number of jobs in the industry, 4,900, so about a third of the industry's jobs are in London. But then London has a lot of digital jobs, so in some ways that's not a surprise. And what's interesting is if you look at the sort of the percentage growth in jobs, actually London is much slower than the rest. And if you look at the Northwest, and I mentioned about Cheshire really ploughing forward in terms of growth, the Northwest games industry is 4.5 times bigger than it was in 2010 when you look at 2019. There is a lot more job postings in London. That's probably reflected that London is quite a high churn job market generally, especially in digital. Lots of movement between companies, whereas the others are probably a little bit more settled, relatively speaking. And again, London is higher paid. That's not a great surprise. It tends to be higher paid in most jobs. One of the interesting ones here is that bottom right one, where we look at the typical duration in terms of days that job postings are online for. And we see that the Northwest, typically they're a lot higher. In terms of 45-day median duration, which suggests that they may be having to trawl longer for candidates to get the right ones to fill the jobs that they're looking for. So it's quite interesting, and there's a lot more in the full report about that in terms of the skills that they're looking for. But if we carry on, we can look in terms of recruitment more generally, and you can see that our job postings data starts in January 2016, and this is a monthly count, and you can see since that time it's nearly doubled in terms of the level of recruitment demand, so just in 4 years. So now there's typically sort of 800 or 900 job postings active in any 1 month in the games industry. And so here we're looking at all those job postings that require video game design or development as a skill. And then at the bottom, you can also look again at that posting durations. And here, what we've done is we've set it out in terms of the range of duration, and it's a bit of a histogram, really. And what you see is quite interesting, that the games industry tends to be either shorter or longer duration than the typical postings out in the labour market. And so that reflects quite a high turnover labour market, so people do move between jobs quite quickly, but also it's quite difficult to get talent as well. So you either fill a job quickly or you take a long while to fill it. And so that's quite an interesting pattern. It sort of suggests it's very dynamic, but also quite difficult to get the skills that you need. So if we go on to the next one, we can have a look at some other data from job postings. And so here we look at the kind of roles that are being recruited for. So game engineers are the bigger ones, followed by C and C++ developers, so very technical, but there's also some of the creative ones in there. Artists, game designers, animators are also part of the mix. Unsurprisingly, perhaps, given it's a highly skilled tech area, the distribution of advertised salaries are a lot higher in the games industry than elsewhere. So you'll see that, as it says there, the median advertised salary is 50% higher than the rest of the labour market, and 35% of job postings are over £50,000 advertised salary. So yeah, these are really good quality jobs that we're seeing created here in the industry. So if you can attract the gaming industry into your area, then it provides a really high productivity, high paid base of jobs. Not huge numbers in total, but they do grow fast, and they are bringing skills into the area that are really valuable in a wide range of uses. And so finally, on the data side, I think the next one is the top skills. And so what we've done here is that we've looked at the skills that are being advertised for jobs that are either advertised above the median salary for the industry or below the median salary for the industry. And so what you see is a real strong tendency for the above median salary jobs to be the ones that are more demanding in technical terms, in terms of programming languages. So you see at the top there, a third of jobs that are highly paid are looking for C++ or C#, whereas that falls to more like a fifth or a quarter amongst the below median salary jobs. Similar story with Python and Java at the top there, and it tends to be jobs that are advertising more of this sort of the design skills, the graphic design skills, so things like Photoshop and animations and Maya down at the bottom there, which are more popular amongst the below median salary jobs. So it's interesting that although there are the kind of the creative jobs in there, they tend to be less well paid than the sort of the programming jobs, which may not be a surprise, but it is interesting to unpack it a bit there.
It's that's particularly useful for when we think about it in regards to the our skills providers and their offering.
Yeah.
I just wanted to ask an additional question on this. I mean, do the skills needs change? Obviously, it's distributed across the country. Do these skills needs change as we look at different areas?
Yeah, so in the full report, what we've got is an analysis across those four regions that we were looking at earlier: London, South East, West Midlands and North West. And what we do there is we look at the skills that are in highest demand compared to the skills that are well supplied. So there we use our profiles data, which we've only just released in the UK, which is a database of in total around 11 million CVs. And for this purpose, we look at those that have got video game design and development skill on their CV. And so for each area, we see the sort of the skills that are in highest demand compared to their supply level. And we do see some quite significant differences. Off the top of my head, I think that, for example, the Northwest seems to have a much bigger gap around these technical skills, which may also explain why they're having to advertise for longer as well. So yeah, so there are some quite interesting differences that emerge there. There's a common pattern, if I remember correctly, around project management methodologies and software, so things like Agile and Scrum. Several of the regions have those as quite high up skills in demand as well. So yeah, but there are some differences and similarities which are quite interesting to unpick.
Brilliant. Okay, I'm just going to check to see whether we've got any questions. Okay, we've been asked if the job postings are sector specific, i.e. by SICK identified games studios.
No, they're not. For one thing, because SICK gets really difficult to do. for the reasons that we set out at the start in terms of Nesta anyway. We also don't rely on SIC mapping of job postings, because you've got to have a reliable fix on the company name to the SIC code, which is adding an element of risk. So what we look for instead are those job postings that are actually looking for video game design and development skills.
Okay, thank you. Okay, that was the only question. Yes,
Excuse me,
so
I did
sorry.
have a question. Sorry, I did have a question sent to me before the
Oh,
webinar.
sure.
So it was as a frontline advisor who still gets a bit of universal work, I get a fair amount of YP young people wanting to work in the games industry. Many of these are not graduate material. What do you say to young people who are operating at level 1 and 2? I'm not sure how relevant that is, but
that's a tough one. I mean, if you look at the industry, from what data we have, it is fairly typical that it's graduate roles. I dare say there are other ways into it, because it's fast-growing industry. There are also ways that you can show your skills in other ways. In some ways, if you're clever enough to go and learn how to program for yourself and contribute something in gaming platforms, then of course that's a way in. I would say that certainly if you're talking to somebody that's at level 1, level 2, you should be at least encouraging them to think that a career in the gaming industry at least will require skills up to sort of level 3 or 4, even if you're able to demonstrate a huge aptitude. So yeah, I think the problem is, of course, is that it's a particularly difficult combination if you are in the careers advising space, because it's sort of very dynamic and interesting, and it also has that crossover, especially for a lot of young people, into their hobby interests as well. So of course, who doesn't want to work in their hobby area? But of course, it's highly demanding and highly competitive, and so yes, it's potentially a little bit like young people saying that they want to pursue a career in their sport. Well, that's fine, and some of them manage to do so and manage to make a lot of money if they're good at football, for example, but you have got to be really good at it, because it probably is ruthlessly competitive as well. So I think it's kind of there's a lot of attraction there, but you need to actually give some realism, and actually looking at some of the data that we've got in the report, and you've seen some of it here in terms of what skills are being demanded. It's not simply a matter of just having a passionate interest in gaming. It's actually showing the skills that people are looking for in terms of technical computing skill, real creative talent in terms of design and animation and things like that. So yeah, it's not just I really like to play games.
So Duncan, do you know whether there's any apprenticeship routes in? Have we got any data?
No, I don't know anything on the back of that. I'm sure that there are, but for this report, we focused on the development of the industry most of all, and okay. we have got some data in the report around the HE supply. Unfortunately, numbers on apprenticeships down to that level of detail are pretty difficult to come by. So we don't actually know what the level of supply is, and also because, as far as I'm aware, apprenticeships specific to the field are relatively recent, it's difficult to get a fix on how much impact they've had on the industry, whereas we have got data that allows us to look at the broad subjects and degrees that people have in the industry.
Sure.
And I've got another question here as well, Duncan.
Yeah.
There's someone asking if we have any data on the Northeast. I'm assuming specifically in regards to this industry. Or of it.
Yeah, we will do. Yeah, I mean, as you can imagine, in the report we focus on the areas that are most substantial. Although I seem to remember that there are some parts of the Northeast that do appear in some of the underlying data. But yeah, I mean, if there's not enough in the report, then talk to us and we can probably dig some out to expand on it. As you'll imagine, when you're writing a report like this, you kind of have to prioritize and focus on the sort of the elements that are wider interest most of all, but that doesn't mean that those other interests aren't important. And obviously, if you're in the Northeast, then the games industry economy is still very important there in any case. So yeah, I mean, as you'll have seen on the map earlier, there are some hotspots in the Northeast around Sunderland, for example, if I remember correctly. But it's a little while since I did that map, so I could be wrong on that one.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to move us on to what happens now. There's obviously more to come. Duncan, do you want to talk us a bit about we've kind of alluded to obviously the report.
Yep.
When is that due to land?
Yeah, so we're hoping probably in early April sometime. We're just getting a bit of feedback from a few people on the report, and then we just got to refine it. And then, yeah, so hopefully while everybody's still in lockdown and is looking for something to distract them from homeschooling the kids, there'll be a nice, interesting report on the games industry. In terms of what extra is in it, as it says on the slide there, there's a few extra bits that we've not covered here, simply for time reasons mainly, but also to fine-tune them for the final report. So the first one is we look at the supply of games industry related degrees and how that's changed since 2013 and how that compares to labour market demand. And we also use our profile data to look at where the industry workforce comes from in education terms, so what university they've attended and what degree subjects they've got. And so it's actually quite a mix, which is quite interesting, really. Then on the geography side, as we talked about earlier, a more detailed exploration of the local hotspots, going down to local authority level, including how that's changed over time. And then also in terms of those broad regions, the sort of the Northwest and Southeast and West Midlands and London, they're the four that have kind of
I think we've just lost Duncan there. I'm just going to take over and assume that you can all hear me.
Yes, we have. We're fine.
Yes, so the report is due to come out early April. Everyone that's registered for this webinar we will email the report to you, so you can look at that. Happy to take questions on the back of that. And if you want to reach out, if we weren't able to answer your questions during the webinar today, do make contact with us, and we'll pick those up offline. Just also wanted to say our next big webinar is going to be focused on the current challenge that we have around COVID-19, but specifically looking at how labour market data can be used to understand and respond to the issue. Really pressing issue, obviously, at the moment. Do register for that. That's open for registration on the Emsi UK website. I will, or we will, circulate a registration link to that to everyone that's attended today. So I think the only other thing that I really wanted to mention, you will, if you've attended previous webinars or been in contact with us, know that we have an annual conference that was scheduled for the 14th of May. That's been postponed, and obviously due to COVID-19, that's been postponed to the 13th of October. Anyone that's previously registered or enrolled will be notified that they can be or will be enrolled on the October date. If they're unable to attend the October date, we're obviously able to refund. But yeah, do book yourselves in. Although it's been delayed, we're still able to have, I think we've got the vast majority of keynote speakers that we had for the first event are scheduled to come to the October event. So all being well, that will go ahead and be great. So I think that just leaves...
Just going back to the conference, just to alleviate any concerns anybody has, if you do book on there is a seven days prior to the event cancellation. So if you do book and you want to cancel, you can cancel and get a full refund up to 7 days before the actual event itself. Okay, thank you.
No problem. I just want to say thank you to Duncan, who we seem to have lost right at the end there, but thanks for sharing your insight in regards to the gaming industry and obviously the report, which is soon to be published. Thank you, Debbie, for hosting, and thanks everyone for attending. Do stay safe.